right, so my talk really just barely fits in my time slot, so I can't take much time to gab with you. I do first, though, want to thank the sponsors. Like this couldn't happen unless we had those sponsors. You know, how many times this week have you been told if you had a problem, talk to someone in a red shirt? All right, if you haven't talked to someone in a red shirt yet, before you leave today, find one of them and shake their hand and thank them. They do a lot of work to make these conferences happen. And I've been sitting here all week watching that. Let's thank Stacy. Yay! All right, so here I am. It's so unlikely that I would be here. I mean, I've been so incredibly lucky. It's astonishing. What about you? Are you lucky? Yeah? Fortune's smiling on you? Do you think, as I do when I think about how I drove when I was 16, that I am lucky to be alive? Look how well everything turned out, right? Or perhaps maybe not so much, right? Maybe you're unlucky. Maybe you were born under an evil sign. You're dragging that bad luck around you like the flu and infecting everyone with it. If you're unlucky, I have good news for you. It turns out that you can hack luck. This guy's name is Richard Wiseman. He's a psychologist at a university in the UK, and he did a 10-year study about luck. He wrote this paper. What he did was he solicited volunteers who thought of themselves either as lucky or unlucky, and he tried to figure out what differentiated those two groups. And he found there's just four things. There's four components to luck. The first one is that lucky people pay attention. They're like not caught up in their own stuff, so they're looking around at the world, so they see opportunities for luck. The next one is that they're open to experience. They're listening to their intuition. The third one, this is sort of weirdly self-referential. They expect to be lucky. They just assume they're going to be lucky. There's a way in which they practice luck in their heads. And finally, this one is even more vague. Lucky people tend to interpret the things that happen to them as if they were lucky. Right? Now, the first time I heard about this research was a talk that Sarah May gave at a conference many years ago. And right after that talk, my partner and I went to Spain and took a self-guided bike tour. And it turned out that the directions were really bad. And every day, like at the end of the day, we would have ridden 60 or 80 kilometers, and it would be like getting dark and raining. And we would be looking for our hotel. And we would look at each other and say, well, at least we're improving our luck. And it made the whole trip better. Like it was amazing how just that difference in perspective changed how much we enjoyed that trip, how lucky we felt. So here they are. Taken together, this list suggests that you can make your own luck. Now, Wiseman, after he identified these four things, he actually took the unlucky people and taught them, and they reported being luckier later. Right? And so, I don't know, maybe you're already making your own luck. Certainly it's true that you're lucky to be here. Like, think about that. Like, how did you get to be in this room today? I mean, first of all, somebody paid. Like, you got time off work. Maybe your boss is paid. Maybe you paid yourself. You got a hotel. You're eating, I'm assuming, right? Like, as a group, we programmers are amazingly lucky. I have some data from, this is 2017 data. All of my data, I'm really sorry. Like, it's mostly right. It's really hard to get good, precise data about the things I'm about to talk about. I went in a data set from 2017, and I arbitrarily selected some categories of programmer-ish jobs. This means that I found everything that had the word computer in it, and programmer in it, and I threw away training jobs and operating jobs and repairing jobs. And I was left with a subset of where the categories totaled 2.3 million people. And the data set showed that the median income in 2017 across all those jobs was $85,000. Now, I think this is an underreporting. If you look at more recent data, you'll see numbers like programmers make on, the median income for programmers is more like $100,000. If you're a system dev, maybe 110. And so I'm going to take some liberties with this number and kind of 2018-ish it and round it up to $93,000 as a median. Now I'm doing this because does anybody in here know the median income of the average worker in the United States? You're making, or you probably will make, on average, 3 times the salary of the average worker in the US. And so I picked this 2017 data set because they broke it out by gender. Let's do that. Don't be alarmed. Just relax. All right, so of that 2.3 million, there were about 1,700,000 men and around 600,000 women. Now, I'm quite sure it's reported this way because at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they only have 2 radio buttons. Right? And if we can believe the NIH that 390 out of every 100,000 humans are non-binary, this number probably in real life looks something more like this. Now I realize that 9,022 is such a small number that you can barely see the color on that chart. But 9,000 people, that's a lot of people. And they deserve their own radio button. Like, fix that. All right. And so, if we turn this into percents, you get that. And I made up some numbers for this conference. I got some data right before it was sold out, and okay, here's what it looked like. I'm gonna go back and forth. Notice that women, despite their enormous efforts and the enormous improvements they've made over the years, the number of women go down. But the number of people, that non-binary list I got, that's the people who chose they as their pronoun. All right, so I had to make up a bunch about this data. Sorry, it could be all wrong. Like, a lot of people didn't answer that question, and so I distributed the non-answers in the proportion to male-female, and I assumed that everybody that said they was in the non-binary category. I just made that up. Could be totally wrong. But still, it's something, right? Okay, so that's gender. Let's look at ethnicity. This is 2019 data. Wait for it. I'm sure you're shocked. So this is overall, and it makes things look more diverse than they actually are. Like the really big companies, Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Twitter, they're more like 56% white and 37% Asian. So some of those companies that have really big influence are less diverse than this group, the group we have here as a whole. All right, so I got income data. So the median income for men is slightly, remember the median in this data set was $85,000. So for men it's 87, for women it's 79. But it turns out that's 90%. That in computer programming, women make about 90% of the average salary of men, which is way better than the actual median across all jobs is women make about 80%, 80 cents on the dollar for men. And so things are really better here. The downside is that out in the normal world across all jobs, women hold about half of the jobs, and they only hold 25% of the programming jobs. So we're making more money, but there are fewer women. That's, I don't know, glass half full. All right, and since I had all this data, of course, I couldn't resist putting it on a Google spreadsheet and trying to figure out who got what piece of the pie. And so that chart looks like this. So if you break it up, so the men, they only represent like 75% of the people, but they get more money, right, because they make more money. And so that's how this splits up. If you start putting ethnicity on here, it turns out that white people get about 50% of all the money paid to programmers. If you add Asians in, these two categories account for about 80% of all the money. And then those other, that's the key to the other colors where I did not, they have such a small part of the pie that I didn't have room to put the percentages on the chart. All right, so now you have all that data. This is just information, right? This is truth. And you have to ask yourself, who are the winners and losers here? And again, don't freak out. I'm not picking on you. But here's the question I asked myself. If you were an alien and you moved to Earth and were going to take a programming job, what demographic category would you choose? Well, you'd be a white guy, right? And so, so we know from Wiseman's research that you can improve your luck, but you're pretty much stuck with your demographic. And that's just a fact. All right. If you happen to have been born into one of those higher paying demographics, lucky you. But speaking of born, let's talk about where you were born. Turns out your neighborhood matters a lot. This guy, Raj Chetty, he's a microeconomist at Harvard, and he studies a thing they call social mobility, which is how likely it is that you will move up in income category relative to your parents. He founded a center at Harvard called Opportunity Insights, and they have this amazing mapping tool. Here's what they did. They got anonymized data for 20 million people, and they went and got income tax data and, income tax returns and census data and something called the American Community Survey data, both for those people in the present. So these 20 million people were born in the late 70s and early 80s, so they're mid-30s to early 40s right now. And so they got data about them and data about their parents, and they made this enormous mapping tool. And what this tool does is it maps data back to the census tract where you were born. And there's a million drop downs and checkboxes here. So you can look at all kinds of things that were true about places where people were born and find out the effect that that has on how they're doing now. For example, there are places in the United States where two neighborhoods are really close together that have very similar demographics, and the outcomes for the children that were born in those neighborhoods are very different today. This map, this is just the main homepage you get there. It shows, up in that right-hand corner, it shows current household income for people of any race or income level, any gender or race, based on all parental incomes back 30 years ago. The colors on the map, the warm colors represent lower incomes and the cool colors represent higher incomes. And so what you can tell, but just by looking at this map, the main front page of their website, there's enormous differences in the United States across regions about how well things turn out for the kids born there later. The South, as always, takes it on the chin. This is Nashville. This is where we're standing right now. You notice that in the sort of center of the country, as you get up high, the colors tend to darker blue, except there's 2 spots in South Dakota where outcomes for kids who were born there in the late 70s, early 80s are really poor. Does anybody have an idea? Can you explain that? They're Indian reservations, yeah. You're doomed, all right? You're just doomed if you grow up in those environments. I'm gonna zoom in on Los Angeles for a minute. So here, this is current household income. Well, sorry, here, let me back up. This is household income for children of low-income parents, current household income for children born back then to low-income parents. And you can see here, like, as you zoom in, there's a lot of granularity at a very tiny level. The census tracts are 4,250 people on average. That's how big the neighborhoods are. I'm going to zoom in a little more. This is the incarceration rate of black male children born to the lowest income parents. This is the Watts neighborhood. Look at that. So that's the census tract we're talking about. This is Compton. There's another census tract. These census tracts, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. These census tracts have similar demographics. They have similar numbers of black men. They're 2.5 miles apart. The incarceration rate today for men born there is 44%. And here it's 6.2%. Like I said, these neighborhoods are very much alike demographically. They have similar percentage of black men, and they're very close together. The difference in outcomes here seems like it must be related to some feature of the neighborhoods rather than some quality of the people. So the promise of America, the dream, is that with hard work, you can succeed even if you come from nothing. How often do you think this dream is achieved? Chetty knows, he calculated the numbers. The chance of you rising from the bottom level of income in the United States to the top is 7.5%. And you can see that's on average. If you're born in the upper Midwest, it's more like 14 or 15. If you're born in the South, it's more like 4 or 5. And there are places here in the South, like in the Southeast where I'm from, Atlanta and Charlotte have had, they've been on an enormous boom over the last 20 years. Like wages have gone up, they've had economic success, and yet the outcomes for children born to low-income parents in those places are abysmal. So what is it about your neighborhood? Well, it turns out that they can figure this out, right? Neighborhoods where, and some of it's counterintuitive, neighborhoods where people are segregated by income and race have worse outcomes for children. If you separate people, segregation hurts outcomes for people who are going to pay the taxes later that will finance your Social Security. Think about that. It also turns out that neighborhoods where most, so here's this. Actually, let me just read this to you because I want to be sure I get it right. Neighborhoods where most families have 2 parents do better. Now, it is not the condition of having 2 parents. Let me be quick to say that. It doesn't really matter whether you individually have 1 or 2 parents, it's about your neighborhood. If the whole neighborhood is full of 1-parent families, then outcomes are worse for children. Good schools really matter. And outcomes are better in neighborhoods where they have more what they call social capital. It's where people know each other and they'll pitch in and help you if you have trouble paying the rent, whatever. All right. So Chetty estimates that if a low-income family could move at birth from a neighborhood in the lowest quintile of upward mobility to a higher quintile of upward mobility, just across town in many cases, that the average lifetime earnings of that child would go up $206,000. Some cities are so convinced by this research. Right now in Detroit and Seattle, they're running experiments where they're doing just that. They're taking people who are getting Section 8 vouchers and overcoming the obstacles that keep those folks from moving to higher opportunity neighborhoods. And they're hoping that it'll change the outcomes for those children as they grow up. For you, this map is a rabbit hole. Like if you get in there, you'll never leave. But if you're thinking about moving in your town, you should look at the Chetty map and find out where the neighborhoods are best for children, because it really makes a difference. All right, so the neighborhoods matter, but Chetty also found out, unsurprisingly, that they don't matter for everyone in the same way. He compared black boys and white boys growing up on the same blocks where parents earn similar incomes. In that situation, the black men have a much lower chance of achieving upward mobility. It's also true, the opposite is true. Black sons of affluent black families have a much greater chance of achieving downward mobility. Chetty describes he says that white families are on a ladder of prosperity and that black men are on a treadmill. It's easy to fall off. So, the neighborhood that you grew up in has a lot to do with how you turn out, with your ability it has maybe more effect on your ability to be successful than even your parents. But despite the effect that your neighborhood has, race and gender play a strong role that's hard to overcome. Here's where I grew up. This is Randolph Drive in Parkersburg, West Virginia. My thoroughly dyslexic father got tired of sitting in the back of class not being able to read, and he quit going to school. The truant officer told him he had to, and when he refused to, they didn't want to put him in jail or make him go to school, and so they lied about his age and let him join the Army. He was at boot camp in Fort Benning, where he met my mom. She grew up on a farm. He was apparently a smartass. I don't quite know what had happened. Apparently they tried to protect him a while because even though the Army still thinks he's older than he is, they knew he was underage. But something happened, and he got orders to ship out. So he and my mom got engaged, and he went to Korea. He was fighting in Korea when he was 15 years old. When he got back, he and my mom got married, and they moved back to his hometown, Parkersburg. He drove a bread truck while he got a GED, and then he became an apprentice mechanic at the local newspaper at 75 cents an hour. During that time, so that was like $30 a week. During that time, he was paid, it was like $130 a month is a better way to think about it. He was paid $140 additional dollars a month on the GI Bill. They basically paid for him to apprentice to learn a skill that would get a good job. When he finally ended his apprenticeship and became a real employee, his pay only went up $10 a month, because the full-time salary was only $10 more than what he was making with his apprentice money and the GI Bill. He joined the union, and they bought this house. The interest rate was initially 8%, but they had after he'd worked for a couple years for Ogden newspapers in Parkersburg, it turns out they had a workplace program where they would buy your mortgage and lend the money back to you at a lower rate. I just couldn't believe it when he told me this. It's inconceivable now, all right? That was the bargain that businesses had to their communities and employees. So the mortgage rate, when that happened, his mortgage rate was cut in half. His interest rate was cut in half. So I lived in this house for the first 17 years of my life. Here's the Chetty map of Parkersburg. I grew up right there. So this is the current household income for all female children born there in the late 70s and early 80s. That light orangish color is about $40,000 a year, which means I am doing great relative to the other women who grew up in this place. I have worked hard, it is true, but it feels like my efforts and natural good nature just aren't enough to explain my success. My parents, relative to their parents, were really successful, and their gradual movement up this income distribution ladder started with buying that first house. And the history of American housing explains a lot about why it's super tough to get ahead today. Owning a house can be the difference between acquiring wealth and being stuck in poverty. And it's about you and about the generations that follow you. Like property ownership is a wealth-generating thing over generations. You can buy something in a maybe up-and-coming neighborhood, you fix it up, you sell it for a profit, you rinse and repeat, and eventually it turns into real money. Now, in the United States, there's a huge gap in home ownership by race. And this gap has deep-running historical roots. In 1865, President Lincoln divided up the land owned by former slave owners, and he granted slaves 40-acre plots. And a year later, President Johnson overturned this program and gave that land right back to the whites. Now we're having all this talk about impeachment. You know that fourth guy whose name they mention when they say presidents that have been impeached? It's Johnson. And he got impeached over this issue. So over the next couple of decades, few blacks accumulated property. Most couldn't afford to buy it outright. And at that point in time, a mortgage required 50 or 60% down, and the balance was due in 1 to 3 years. Yeah. So a few generations later, a few decades later, right before the Great Depression, there was this big boom and then bust in housing in America. And most blacks at that time, we're not even a generation past the end of the Civil War. Most blacks at that time still did not own property. At the height of the Great Depression, the National Realtors Association in the United States decided that they started arguing that the federal government should get into housing. And as a stimulus for the economy, that's what happened. And so the federal government did a couple things. They wanted to encourage private homeownership, and they did that by standardizing housing and providing mortgage insurance. So because they were operating at scale, they could drive down costs. And what happened was, now that lenders are insured against loss, they cut the prevailing interest rates in half, and they started lending up to 90% of the values of homes. So by 1939, with the advent of these federally insured mortgages, it became cheaper in the United States to buy than to rent. Unfortunately, these federal programs they were based on 3 assumptions. People could be divided by race. Only white communities could maintain property values, and that segregation by race was necessary to protect these values. So something called the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation created maps where they would grade neighborhoods. Here's the map for where I live in Durham, North Carolina. It's colored, it's color-coded. This is from 1937. It's color-coded, right? Areas in green, of course, graded A, they're for whites only. If a neighborhood had somebody Jewish in it, it was going to be ranked B or C no matter what. They're going to be blue or yellow. They were considered risky. A neighborhood with any one black in it was graded D, no matter what economic level the inhabitants had. These neighborhoods were considered, these are direct quotes, worthless or likely to decline in value, and no loans could be made for, quote, either purchasing or upgrading. Right? So on their own maps, what lenders would do is they would take these D-graded neighborhoods and they would find those spots on the maps and they would outline them in red ink. And this is where the term redlining came from. Realtors were not permitted to sell houses to blacks in the white neighborhoods, and because they were afraid those mortgages were federally insured and they were afraid the property values would go down. Blacks were unable to get loans to buy houses in the places where they were allowed to live. So I told you that it's cheaper in America at this point in time to buy than to rent, but blacks are forced into only renting houses. Now I know for some of you that 1937 might seem like an inconceivably distant time. My dad was born in 1932, and I talked to him on the phone last week. This is right now. Okay, I'm going to show you a few more things. I'm just stunned by all this. The archive from which I got these maps contains the paperwork that was written down by the people who did these gradings. Let's look at A2. Okay, gently rolling, plenty of infrastructure, no detrimental things. This is near Duke University in Durham. People, they're making like the top salary is like $8,000 a year. And then these questions are just astonishing. Foreign-born, none. Negro, none. Infiltration, like what is infiltration? You get infiltrated by the enemy, right? Infiltration, none. No families on relief. All the homes are in good repair. 90% are owned. Plenty of mortgage money. Signed by Leon Powell on May 21st, 1937. Let's look at D6. Rolling, okay, not so bad. Yeah, there's railroad tracks. People have good jobs though, and the top salaries here are really not terrible compared to what the professors at Duke University are making. Foreign-born, Negro, yes, of course we need to know the percent. Infiltration, oh, now we know what this means. Many relief families, many poor but some fair housing. Only 15% of the people own. There are no mortgage funds. So the Federal Housing Administration and the VA adopt the HOLC's rules, and they grant loans only to buyers whose homes are located in, quote, stable and desirable areas. And a single black person living on your block could get your neighborhood redlined, which meant all the whites were super interested in keeping their neighborhood segregated because they wanted people to get mortgages to buy houses in that neighborhood. Neighborhoods are strictly segregated, and it starts at this time, and we did it, us, the government. What happens is that whites get on the path of homeownership and prosperity, but you cannot buy a house if you're black. Here's that map superimposed over today's Google map of Durham, and those grades, they echo down the decades till today. Here's the Chetty map. This is current household income for children of low-income parents. Now, in many places, the Chetty map exactly maps to the HOLC maps from '37. Here, there are two other factors that happened in Durham since then. One is in the 60s, there was a big urban renewal project that put a highway through a thriving black downtown and destroyed it. Right? I drive on the highway all the time, and I never thought about it. When I started researching this talk, it's astonishing. Like, there's a whole other rant about urban renewal that I will not get into right now. The other thing that happened is schools in the South were desegregated, and the way that the whites in Durham dealt with that is they made separate schooling systems for the city and the county. And so the whites could move to the county, and so there was this white flight, which changed the demographics of the population some. And so in places where it doesn't map up to the 1937 stuff, it's because neighborhoods were destroyed and whites moved out. But still, despite those big changes, here's today's income levels in the neighborhoods based on those 1937 maps. Right? 85% of the people who live in neighborhoods that were graded A are in the middle to upper level income brackets. And as we go down, all right, here's race. The areas that were graded A in 1937 now are 15% minority. It was unbelievable to me. Here, I'm going to zoom out and show you the Chetty map. This is an area map. That section right there is Durham. All right, and you can see what happened on this map. That's Chapel Hill, where the University of North Carolina is. Here's Raleigh. That's the capital of North Carolina. Here's the suburb of Raleigh called Cary. You can probably guess who lives where. Of course, I live right there, where the aliens would choose. All right, so outside of my college years, I've almost never rented. In 1980, I bought this house, and then I bought this house. I loved this house then. This was I moved to Durham. Those were in Tallahassee, where I went to college. This is in Durham. My house is behind that tree. Like you can't really make the Google Maps driver get a good shot of your house. So I lived in that house in Durham, and then I moved to Western Colorado. So this is my house on Hall Avenue. And then when I moved back east, this was my house on Welkin Court in Durham. And then I lived in this house for 6 years, and finally I wanted my own real house. And so I had one custom built. I bought a lot and got a construction loan. My house is not the monstrous house on the right, nor that house that you can see on the left. My house is the house at the end of that driveway. And so I'm going to try. So again, that big house is not mine. My house is way back there. And this picture was actually taken in 2007, a month after we moved in. You can a little bit see, you probably can't tell in this picture, you can see that there's a solar collector on the roof because I have solar hot water. I was told that I was not really allowed to show you those pictures because my house-proud partner wanted it to look better. So here's some modern photos. This is a picture that you can see the plantings have grown up. If you walk up my driveway, there's the little garden. I'm responsible for none of this. There's the little garden, and then if you walk up, you can see the beehive and the obligatory Subaru. And then if you go closer, this is a close-up shot of my house, okay? It is awesome and beautiful and passive solar. I'm actually getting photovoltaics put on the roof right now, so my utility bills are about to go to zero. The south wall is full of windows, so it's beautiful and light-filled, and it's like the perfect house. It's in a co-housing community, so it's an absolutely great neighborhood. I am lucky to have it. And part of the reason I have it was because of the equity I earned over the years in all those other houses. And so if neighborhoods have a lot to do with outcomes, but you can't pick your neighborhood, and owning property is a path to wealth, but you can't buy a house, well, you don't get to have this. And that sucks. And I have to admit, I kind of hate knowing all this. I've been enormously successful, and I was really happy when I could think of myself as hardworking and a bit lucky. But then once I started examining the source of my good fortune, I found that a scary proportion of it might well originate from biases in the system rather than having been justly earned by my efforts. Now, everything I've told you about so far has been baked in before I was born, so I could kind of let myself off the hook. But research, dang it. So now I have some context to understand a few things that have happened in my lifetime. And I'm going to talk to you just about 4 of them. Like this. How is it that now 0.1% of the people in the United States own more than the bottom 80%? What about this? It's inconceivable to me that 400 people own more than 150 million. And when did we become more like China and Russia than France and Great Britain? Now, I look at this graph, and the question I feel like the need to ask is, what happened in 1980? This is an idea, it's a political idea about that the market is better at fixing things than the government. Now, this idea is nonpartisan. I want to emphasize that, right? It's been held as a truth under a number of presidents under multiple political parties. But I can say now that after 40 years of this neoliberalism experiment, there's a lot of data showing that it's been a disaster for the United States. This woman, Heather Boushey, has a new book called Unbound, which goes through all the data in terrifyingly readable detail. The contention of neoliberalism is that markets will self-regulate if left to themselves, that unmanaged markets are both fairer and more efficient than managed ones. And Boushey argues, however, and has data to show, that some inefficient unmanaged markets are bad for everyone at every level of wealth. Now, it's easy to turn managed markets into unmanaged ones. You just have to privatize stuff and let people buy it. All right? The problem with that is, it should surprise no one that though it's easy to do, it's very hard to take back. Because what happens is those unmanaged markets created super rich elites. And those super rich elites are now quite happy with the current system just as it is. They now have the power to keep it this way. Over the last 40 years, a number of things that matter to the majority of us have gone significantly downhill. There are far too many examples of this. I'm going to mention just 4. I'm class of 75, the product of an excellent K through 12 education. My success today started there. I went to this high school. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. In it, you could take French, Latin, German, or Spanish. They had a world-class suite of AP courses. I took advanced calculus and sang in the best a cappella choir in the United States. Those days are gone. This is the data from 2016. This is a map of where places fall relative to the median of funding for schools. You may or may not know that schools are primarily funded through property taxes. And we just already went through the whole property thing. You can imagine that it is inevitable that places where people have not been allowed to accumulate wealth have poor schools. In Durham, like I said earlier, the city-county divide, when schools are desegregated, it concentrated poor people in the city, and everybody who could afford to buy a house or was allowed to buy a house moved to the county. And so those schools were terrible. I think I have time. I'm going to tell you one more school story. My partner does educational evaluation, and she was recently in southern Louisiana interviewing teachers about a funding program. So she was like evaluating a grant. They were in a room, it was raining, and they were in a room where the number of drips were causing the buckets to fill up so fast that they had to be emptied during the interview. And the principal was so embarrassed about this that they came in and moved them to another room. Now, the feature of this other room wasn't that it was dry, it's just that the leaks were slower. They didn't have to come in and empty the buckets. Those kids don't have a chance. All right. Wages. If you break the unions, workers no longer have the power to bargain for fair wages. This is reflected in the minimum wage. Here, on this graph, the dark purple, is the actual dollar amount of the minimum wage. The light purple is its value in today's dollars. Look, lucky me. That's the last time I made minimum wage, almost at the peak. Right? That's about $10.80 in today's dollars. The living wage for a single adult with no children where I live in Durham is $12.15. You could almost make it. 2 adults making living wage would be getting by. This is not enough. How about health care? Canada, which has regulated health care, spends half as much per capita as we do. Almost 1 in 10 people in the United States don't even have health insurance. 2 years ago, my aforementioned partner was diagnosed with breast cancer. In that year, we spent, the 2 of us, on premiums, deductibles, and co-pays, spent $30,000 out of pocket for treatment that cost about $100,000. Remember that the median income in the United States is $31,000. 2/3 of all bankruptcies today in the US are related to medical problems, either because of outright costs or because of lost wages. Next. Yeah, I bet this affects some of you still, right? It's really hard to get a good job without an education. When you quit funding public colleges, what happens is costs go up and there are fewer seats. And so getting into those colleges is harder. At that point, you get privatization of schools, which means you get for-profit colleges and students borrowing enormous amounts of money. That money is, by the way, insured by your tax dollars against default. A well-educated population improves life for everyone, but getting a degree today often means taking on crippling debt. I borrowed money when I was in school back in 1978, and frankly, it was a real amount, it mattered, but it was so small I don't even remember it now. And I paid it off over a time period that I can't even recall. Like, all I can tell you is that I bought a house in 1980 when I was paying on that student loan. So it couldn't have been that bad. Today, almost a quarter of the adults under 60 in the United States have some form of student loan debt. And they're paying that debt rather than buying property and accumulating wealth. So the history of housing in America makes it clear that the dream was never available to everyone. But over the last 40 years, it has moved out of reach for almost anyone. We've increasingly become a society of winners and losers, and the winners is I practiced this name so many times and I knew I'd screw it up. Anangirdadas rights are taken all. And the elites he talks about in this book, many of them are in tech. Wealth has become so concentrated in the US that the super rich have piles of money. And one of the psychological effects of having piles of something is that you begin to believe that you deserve it, that you earned it. And if you're super rich, you must also be super capable and super smart and super good at everything. And it becomes easy, maybe even necessary, to discount the enormous role played by luck and opportunity in your success. This, by the way, is how a guy like Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, decides that coffee thing turned out so well, I'll just be president. Folks in the top tier of wealth donate enormous sums of money to charitable organizations trying to salve the hurts of the have-nots, but generally they don't use their power and influence to champion the kinds of systemic change that would turn have-nots into haves. Girardosh suggests that we don't need the rich to fund special programs to give teachers extra pay. Instead, we need them to fund programs to teach those teachers how to organize. Public education funding is broken, and the people whose job it is to do it know how to fix it, and they're the people who should be in charge of that. The super rich are fine with doing good, but adamantly resist the idea that they should instead do less harm. We have the powerful fighting to change the world in ways that essentially keep it the same, or possibly make it worse. There's been a huge power shift in America in my lifetime. Girardosh asked these two questions. Are we ready to hand over the future to the elite, one supposedly world-changing initiative at a time, or is meaningful democracy in which we all potentially have a voice worth fighting for? I'm almost done. And I can't help but wonder if you're relieved. I promise you, my original intent was to make a cheerful talk about how lucky I've been. But look what I found out, right? I picked the rock up. And throughout all the research, the whole time I was following this line from luck to neighborhoods determining outcomes to redlining choosing neighborhoods to mortgages and homeownership and wealth and rental prices and evictions and on, many things I haven't even talked to you about. I spent the whole time I could hear myself saying, it's not my fault. It wasn't me that caused this. The truth is that I'm a woman of a certain age, which means in real life that I am someone to whom you could legitimately say, okay, boomer. And I thought that I was just hardworking and lucky. But it turns out that for my entire life, I've been surfing what may be the final crest of the last wave of the American dream. I didn't act to turn this into a place where a few people make piles of money if lots of folks get thrown into jail, get evicted from their homes, take on enormous loans to get crappy degrees, go to terrible public schools, can't get a job at a decent wage, lose everything if they get sick, and live in a world that is simultaneously drowning and on fire. I didn't act to do it, but I stood by and let it happen. I feel the need to beg your most humble pardon for the world we're leaving you. Sorry. And it wasn't your fault. But it's on you to fix it. So what should you do? First of all, pay attention to your complicity. It's a freaking eye-opener. Like, own it. Admit it. Next, give back. I can promise you, I have upped my charitable giving. You got money, give some away. Do the best tech you can, if that's available. All right, but you can do those things personally, but they're all like they're all working on the symptoms. All right, we need to work on the cause. You got to think bigger. We need solutions that are public, democratic, universal, and institutional. If you were born after 1980, which many of you were, you probably don't remember a time when government was well thought of. You spent your whole life, in fact, there was an ad campaign. You've been listening to the neoliberals quote Ronald Reagan as saying, the scariest words in the English language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. If the last 40 years have proved anything, it's that there are much scarier things. In a democracy, you are the government. We need a tax code that fixes the wealth gap and saves the middle class. We need federal housing programs that give everyone a shot at home ownership. We need to forthrightly deal with our history as a slave nation and think about reparations. We need empowered workers that can bring balance to this low-road form of capitalism that we practice here in the United States. And we need to stop climate change. You are the smartest and the brightest and the best, and the most amply rewarded. I trust you more than anyone to transform the system into something that works for us all. And this is not going to happen by itself. So you need to get to work. This thing. Look at that thing. All right, Sal. Thank you.